GCEP is a fundamental scientific research program focused on finding clean energy technologies for the future. We sort of look in the 10 to 50 year time frame, realizing that real innovation is going to be needed if we are going to really transform our energy system in such a way that we provide power for billions, 9 billion people, but at the same time protect the planet.
We concluded that you need a portfolio that works across primary energy resources and ways that we convert those resources into services that we can use, but at the same time offers some new options for reducing carbon emissions.
Right. Who are some of the key investors and partners?
There are four companies that sponsor it: ExxonMobil, Toyota, GE, and Schlumberger.
We really rely on them for their knowledge about the current energy system, and we also rely on them for knowledge about what will be scalable. Mm-hmm. How can we, manufacture enough widgets? How can there be a sufficient energy supply to make this a worthwhile endeavor? We try to take the best of what industry has to offer and the best of what academia has to offer, and pull that together and make wise decisions, hopefully, about what to invest in.
Coal's abundant in North America. Mm-hmm. China has a lot of coal. Mm-hmm. India has a lot of coal. These are developing nations. They're going to use it, right?
Well, that's what they're doing today. Yep. That's what we're doing today too.
They're building new power plants with coal. They have a 40-year life. What can we do?
There's nothing intrinsically wrong with using fossil fuels. It's the emissions that are creating the concern and challenge today. Just like we've learned to scrub other things, other pollutants out of smokestacks, like sulfur and so forth, particulates, we could scrub the carbon dioxide out of the smokestack of a power plant or any other industrial facility. And so now we've prevented it from going into the atmosphere. So then the question is, well, what on earth do you do with this? Because there's a lot of it. The idea is that you can pump it deep underground, put it in a place where there's a really good seal, a rock seal, so that it stays trapped underground essentially permanently. And if you have the right geology, yes, it looks quite promising, but that right geology is not everywhere.
I think the biggest challenge is the scale. That if you think about how much CO2 we emit and how much volume that we would have to handle in order to do this, that convinces me that this can't be the only thing we do. Part of it is choosing to charge ourselves the real costs of using various energy resources. So we don't currently charge ourselves anything for the privilege of putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, for example. Right. We need to recognize that generates real costs and be willing to pay those ourselves.
Give us a feel for the time frame and some of the things we can expect.
We will make a transition that involves more of the renewable resources. They could be the sun, they could be wind, they could be geothermal, they could be biofuels. But the quantities are big enough that it takes lots of capital investment to do this, so that will happen over time. And then virtually every energy technology has some set of problems that also have to be solved along the way. I think overall the timescale for doing things is multiples of decades.
It's a long race, but it is a race. We can't afford to sit back just because it's going to take a long time. It's like a marathon. Just because it takes a long time doesn't mean you don't start now as fast as well as you can. Cars are great examples. You can buy a car that gets 15 miles of driving per gallon of gas, or you can buy a car today that gets 50. So that's efficiency. You can go 3 times farther for that same gallon of gasoline.
Right.
And that's something you can really do. I mean, you can cut your emissions by a third. Another big one is just thinking about driving. Like the amount of your emissions depends upon the vehicle miles traveled. So you can make a decision. Maybe combine trips to the grocery store, and it all adds up. So it would certainly be possible to cut back your driving maybe by 10%.
Yeah.
And that right there, that's 10% less energy. It directly correlates.
Why does efficiency matter?
It seems to me that it's part of the portfolio of ways to attack this. This is a really big system of energy that we use now. We need lots of ways to modify it to be better. In the near term, reducing the amount of energy because we use it more efficiently is one of the ways that we can make progress and save ourselves money in the process.
I think the first thing to realize is what we value in electricity. Number one, it's reliable. You know, we want electricity 24/7. We use it for almost everything in our life. I mean, I think we can't even imagine life without electricity. So reliability is really important. The second thing is cost. That today, we are really lucky in the United States, particularly, to have relatively inexpensive electricity. And, you know, we've built a society around that. So what we want is to create the same level of reliability. And we also want it to be reasonably low cost. So yes, there's wind power and solar power, which are very promising. They're really huge resources. We know how to convert them to electricity. But the question is how do we introduce them into the system that we have today that actually works pretty darn well? There's a really clever new idea, and it's something called demand-side management that says, okay, well, maybe if we can get people or people's, you know, systems in their homes, their refrigerators or whatever, to help with that management, so if there's a little drop in power, well, maybe we can say that, well, let's, you know, not turn on our refrigerator right now, or let's not run our washing machine. So that's going to be one of the keys to managing this transition. So having better storage technology, electricity storage technology, is going to be really enabling. But, you know, we're going to need a lot more of that in the future if we're going to deal with all this intermittency. So today, the way we store electricity sounds kind of crazy, but we actually pump water up into a dam or a reservoir, and then we can regenerate that electron, so to speak, later on. That's
when the water flows downhill.
When it flows downhill.
It turns a turbine.
So that's kind of one of our main energy storage systems. Now, in the long run, I mean, it's perfectly plausible to imagine an energy system that's really based primarily on renewable energy supplies, and, you know, whether that's 100 years from now, whether that's, you know, 200, whether it's 80, you know, I think is really uncertain.
The biggest issue facing wind right now is the question of grid connection. If we want to use the wind resource that we have up in the mountains in California, you also need to be able to deliver that power to users. That is, you have to have a grid that's capable of absorbing it. And the wind doesn't, of course, always blow at exactly the right time.
Right,
so you have to figure out how to deal with the intermittency. Now, you can't do everything with wind. So it's one element in the mix.
An important growing piece.
Yeah, I think another important thing is the scale of the amount of energy we use is so enormous that if all of a sudden you said, well, let's meet a significant fraction, 50% of our electricity from wind, all of a sudden you're talking about using a lot of land area. There are even, you know, potentially some meteorological changes, local changes in winds and so forth, that or changes in sensitive habitat. So
because you're grabbing that wind.
Well, you're grabbing that wind and you're extracting energy from it on a small scale that might have no impact whatsoever. But anything that you do on the scale of our energy system, we have to understand all of the impacts. And so it also speaks to why we don't want to rely on any one thing, because we might, you know, perturb systems in such a way that we couldn't foresee.
How do we get to a solar future?
There's a very big resource. It's thousands of times the amount of energy we humans use altogether right now. So it's not the shortage of energy there, it's how we convert it into something we use. Now, several issues. Cost. Solar still is more expensive than conventional resources unless you're in a place where it takes a lot of wire to get conventional electricity there. Efficiency, the lower the efficiency, the more area it takes, so there are land use issues.
Pretty substantial land use.
And then there are the materials. Some of the materials that go in some current solar cells are either rare or toxic as can be. So you need to have a set of systems that deal with that. And then there's the whole storage issue.
I think it's also fair to say, though, it's an incredibly exciting source of energy. It is so abundant. It is so ubiquitous. The costs are coming down very, very quickly. The best material scientists in the world are discovering new ways to make solar cells with more earth-abundant materials, to make them more efficient. So I'm actually very, very encouraged about solar. You know, in the long run, and every problem you said is absolutely true, but I think it's really very, very encouraging, the progress that's being made. The resource that people are excited about is all the heat that's trapped in the crust of the Earth. So we have the opportunity to mine the heat out of the Earth. I personally don't put that as a renewable resource because you do have to mine the heat out of the Earth, and it's not going to be replenished sort of on reasonable timescales.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't understand that.
right, yeah. So you basically
So you're withdrawing heat.
You're withdrawing heat,
And you've got to move.
and then you've got to move.
Okay.
The amount of renewable component to geothermal energy is only twice what humans use.
Okay.
So there's about 30 terawatts of geothermal heat flux, and we use 15 as humans today. So having said that, though, there's hot rocks everywhere.
The resource is huge.
The resource is it's probably the biggest resource. So the challenge becomes, well, how do you effectively mine heat out of rocks? Well, the way you do it is you drill wells into it, you pressurize those rocks, you can get them to break up and, not extensively, but create small fractures, which allows you to sweep water through those rocks and basically mine the heat and produce power. But it's hard. It's really hard to take, granitic rocks or whatever and break them up.
Is it a hydrofracking process?
It's basically a hydrofracking process.
Using natural gas and conventional gas?
Exactly. I think then it's a matter of cost. Making it, the lower the temperature, the less efficient it is, the bigger systems you need. So basically, that's the battle you're fighting.
Good old friend Price coming back in.
Well, price and thermodynamics, that if you have a small temperature difference or whatever driving force you're using, then the systems have to be bigger and they're less efficient. That's just thermodynamics.
I remember as a kid, hearing about the magic of the hydrogen economy, and we were going to drive around and only emit water, and and then we went through disillusionment with that because we realized, well, how do you make the hydrogen, and number two, how do you store the hydrogen?
Right.
I think that hydrogen is something we do know how to make. We do know how to split water. Right now, it's too costly, and we don't have very good ways to store it.
Hydrogen in a fuel cell in a car. I mean, how does hydrogen make my car go? I mean, what?
Yeah, so basically what you do is you have hydrogen on one side and you have oxygen on another, and then you have a catalyst which will split the hydrogen apart. The hydrogen can then move across the membrane, and that electron that split off of it actually can complete a circuit, and then you form water on the other side that all recombines, and in the meantime you've been able to extract it.
So this electron that moves over here is electricity, basically.
Sure, it drives an electric motor.
Right, that's what drives your car. In the long term, I think we have to keep hydrogen on the table, and even if ultimately we don't just store hydrogen, certainly that will be an intermediate to creating other chemical storage.
Do you see biofuels as a realistic, significant part of a fluid alternative future?
One more element of the portfolio, the potential for biofuels to create some dense energy storage form for aircraft, for example, makes it pretty appealing. But we also need a lot of land and water and fertilizer, and we need to feed the planet too. So there are all kinds of trade-offs there.
But that's a really important one, particularly in the transportation sector we call flight. Is liquid fuels are about as dense as they get. Probably be a long time before we're flying to London with a battery-powered airplane.
Seems like a stretch.
Too much weight.
There's no simple single solution to this complicated system. We need a portfolio. I think it's the most important message, that the scale of the system and the fact that we need to invest across a spectrum of primary energy resources, and the ways we convert that into services that we can use, and that needs to be widespread so that it's robust and as stable as we can make it, and that we don't have all our eggs in any one basket.
Yeah.
And then I think efficiency. So if portfolio is message number one, it's efficiency at every step in the primary energy conversions, and as well as all the way through to the end use. You need efficiency. And then I guess the third one I would put on the list is that whatever energy system you're using, you need to manage to minimize environmental impacts. We need everybody to do what they can. I mean, the idea that there's only one way to solve this problem is ridiculous. We want everybody in the boat. We don't want to say you're out there and we're in here, you're the bad guy, we're the good guy. We're all good guys and gals. We just need to all do our part. Right.
We'll raise everyone. I like that.